Hi guys, it's Jess from Honest Fiction, and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to be doing the Romantasy Reader Book Tag. Alright guys, so if you're familiar with my channel, you know I do not do a ton of tag videos. However, when I first started BookTube, tags were all the rage. I feel like everyone was doing tags, and honestly, I kind of missed them. So when I saw Jess from Peace Love Books created an original Romantasy Reader tag, I wanted to give it a try. So this tag is based around romantasy or fantasy romance books, and I am really excited to get into these questions. So if you're unfamiliar with my channel, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. If you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. You can also hit that notification bell to be notified whenever I post new bookish content. You can also check out my Instagram, Goodreads, and Patreon, all linked down below. With all that out of the way, let's get into these tag questions. And the first question is, what was your gateway into romantasy? So technically, I think you could say Twilight, because that was one of the first romantasies, if you can classify it as romantasy, that I was really, really obsessed with. Like, I loved those books. I went to a midnight release party. Like, I was all about them. But I feel like that really didn't pave my way into reading more romantasy. Now, A Court of Thorns and Roses was definitely my introduction to my obsession when it comes to fantasy romance and romantasy. I read this during the lockdown. It changed my life. I finished the first 3 books in this series and then immediately went back and reread the first 3 books. Like, I couldn't get these characters out of my head. And because of this series, I then went and looked into more fantasy romance. So right after I read this, I actually read the first From Blood and Ash book, and then it really went from there. So this, along with From Blood and Ash, really is what sparked my love of romantasy. If you are somehow unfamiliar with A Court of Thorns and Roses, it is one of the best fantasy romance series. It is my favorite fantasy romance series of all time. It is by Sarah J. Maas. We are following Farah, and Farah is a human girl that is living on the border of the Fae and human lands. One day, she's out hunting for food because her family is living in poverty, and she is the main caretaker, and she kills a Fae, mistaking it for a wolf. So because of this, she is forced to live as a hostage in the spring court, in the spring lands of the Fae. And the story kind of goes from there. And the first book is very much a Beauty and the Beast reimagining to a certain extent. But after that, it really changes and just becomes the most epic romance ever. And I just love it so, so much. So A Court of Thorns and Roses was definitely my gateway into romantasy. And next up is, what is the longest romantasy book that you have read? Now, I was positive it was Zodiac Academy Sorrow and Starlight, which is book 8 in the Zodiac Academy series. Unfortunately, I did give this book 2.5 stars, and I was a little disheartened knowing that the longest fantasy romance book I ever read, I was not a huge fan of, only to then discover that House of Flame and Shadow is actually the longest book I've ever read, or romantasy book I've read. And I also was not a huge fan of this one. I think I ended up rating this 3 stars or 2.5. Either way, kind of a bummer, but this is the 3rd book in the Crescent City series. It has a lot of mixed reviews. I do have a wrap-up somewhere that I'll leave in the cards in the description where I discuss my feelings on this book and why I wasn't crazy about it. Overall, I still love Sarah J. Maas. This book was just a real big miss for me. And next up is, what is an underrated romantasy that more people need to read? So I did narrow this down to 3 books. First up, we have A King So Cold by Ella Fields. This is the first book in a dark fantasy romance duet. I love Ella Fields. She is one of my favorite romantasy authors and deserves so much more love. But this is essentially a villain origin story, so we're trying to discover why our main character has become so cold and merciless that she has an enemy army ready to invade her kingdom at the start of this. Her husband has been found and has absolutely no memory of her, which she does not seem to care about. And it's really just kind of understanding this girl's story and what led her to where she is, and I just absolutely loved it. And the second book, The Stray Prince, even better, somehow darker, and oh my gosh, please read it. It's so good. Then the other one is not super underhyped, but it is one of my favorite fantasy romance series, and I need everybody to read it. It is Reign of Shadows and Endings by Melissa K. Rorich. It is the first book in the Legacy series. I binged the first 2 books in this series in 2 days. Like, I could not put these books down. The 3rd book did take me a while because I read it physically, but I'm actually going to reread it via audio in February just so I can get the full experience. But this is a dark fantasy romance. It definitely has a captor-captive vibe. We're following Tessa, and she lives in a world where the gods gave power to the legacy, and the legacy controlled the Fae. And our main character is a Fae. And when she comes of age, she knows she's going to have to work in one of the 6 different Fae houses. So when she comes of age, she is very surprised that she becomes the primal source to the heir of endings, meaning she is going to have a forced mating bond placed on her. Heir of endings, I'm sorry, is going to be able to sense her thoughts, feel when she's near, and honestly, he is going to become attracted to her and she him. So it's a very like taboo position to be placed in, and she wants nothing to do with it. And it's just so unbelievably good. So please pick it up. I absolutely love it. And then last up is Peaches and Honey, and this book is very, very similar to The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. We're following this woman who has been suffering from vitiligo, so she's been kind of ostracized from her community, and one day she shows this peasant kindness, and in return he gives her a peach that makes her immortal. So now she is growing up and looking at all of like the nuances of humanity. So as she is spending the years as an immortal, she sees the beauty but also the pain that humanity can cause, and it's just such a beautiful story. I absolutely loved it. The writing is so whimsical and almost poetic, and I cannot wait for the sequel to release via audio. And next up is what is the longest fantasy romance series that you've read? This was easy. It is Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. This is an 8-book fantasy romance new adult series. So I actually read this right after finishing ACOTAR for the second time. I will say the first 2 books are not my favorite, but after that, it becomes so epic. The characters are so well developed. You will fall in love with half of them. Oh my gosh. There are scenes in this series I still find myself thinking about to this day. They were just written in such a way and were so emotional, and I love this series. I actually recently did a reread with all of my patrons, and I just had such a good time. But if you're unfamiliar with the plot of this, honestly, this is somewhat better going into blind, and there are so many spoilers, but we are following Selena Sardathian, that at the start, she's this very immature girl that is working as a slave, or she's captured as a slave and working in Endover. And then she is taken to a kingdom where she has to fight to the death in this gladiator-type tournament. And the winner of the tournament will be awarded kind of being like the special assassin to the king, or the personal assassin to the king. And then the story really goes from there. But there's so many other components at play. There are other characters. There's mysteries that have to be solved. It's just so good. So if you've been hesitant to pick up Throne of Glass, I know a lot of people say it feels very young compared to ACOTAR. And it does. The first 2 books definitely feel very YA. They were some of the first books Sarah J. Maas wrote. But after the first 2, kind of 3, it really does feel written for someone slightly older. It feels much more new adult. And the characters are really where this series shines. So please, if you have not read Throne of Glass yet, you need to pick it up. Next up is what is a romantasy book that is worth the hype? Now, I feel like this might get a little controversial. I went through about 7 books that I started to film and then ended up changing my mind. So there are definitely fantasy romance books that I think gained a lot of hype that did deserve the hype. Now, there are some that I think gained a little bit more hype than they really deserved, such as Fourth Wing. Love that book. Gave it 5 stars. I don't understand why it got so much attention. It was good. I just not sure if it was really worthy of that amount of hype. So I tried to find a book that had a lot of hype when it released, and I thought that hype made sense. And for that, I came up with From Blood and Ash. And before you click out of this video, I understand the later books. Not everyone loves where this series went. I am not even caught up with this series. I am only on book 4 of the main series. I don't think I went past that, and up to book 2 on the prequel series. But this first book, I will reread over and over. It has one of the best fantasy romances. I love it. I absolutely love it. Hawk is one of my top book boyfriends. The pacing is perfect. Everything about this book. So I remember this is one of the first books that like I actually experienced the hype with. Like prior to this book releasing or me reading this book, I never went onto Facebook to look for book groups or to try to talk to other people that had read the book, just because I needed to talk to people about this after I finished it. So because of that, I am saying From Blood and Ash is worth the hype. Regardless of how you feel about the rest of this series, I absolutely love this first book. Now, if you're unfamiliar with this first book, it's actually the first YouTube video I ever did was a review of this book that you can check out. It's still up. But this is following Poppy, who has been raised as the maiden in isolation. And one day she decides she's going to go out and have a little fun. So she goes to a bar in disguise, and there she has an encounter with Hawk, who is the newest member of the Rise Guard. And the next day, Hawk is assigned as her personal guard, and slowly Hawk brings Poppy into his world, and it's their romance. And while all of this is going on, there is all of this political maneuvering kind of happening in the background. We have vampires, we have werewolves. It's so good, and the pacing never lets up, and the spice is fantastic. The banter, everything about it. So I love this book, and I think it is worth the hype. And next up is what romantasy features your favorite romance. Now, I feel like this is going to get really repetitive because ACOTAR definitely features my favorite romance, so does For Blood and Ash, and Zodiac Academy definitely has some romances that I really vibe with. But two fantasy romances that I've read recently that I've just loved the romance are Blood and Steel, which is the first book in the Legend of Thesmar series. I feel like with this romance, our protagonist, our FMC, is really just trying to find herself and come into her own power. And the MMC, I'm not going to say his name, he really just wants to help her. You can tell how much he loves her and supports her. And I love them. I love them so much. And the other one is Serpent and the Wings of Night. So the main guy in this says there she is anytime like she does something impressive or he just sees her showing her true self and things like that. And I ate that up. I love that saying so much. So this is another one of my favorite romances. And next up is what is your favorite cover of a romantasy book? So I could not narrow this down to one, so I have two. First up, we have Zodiac Academy. I think both of these are from the Bookish box. And I just absolutely love this edition. So I will also show you the naked hardback. Looks like that. So pretty. And then it also has inside artwork with ombre edges. So this is one of my favorite series that I own. And then the other one, also, if you're unfamiliar with the Zodiac Academy, it's a new adult fae romance, kind of a bully romance. We're following these two twin girls, Tori and Darcy Vega, and they are very impoverished. And one day on their 18th birthday, a vampire shows up and says, hey, paranormal creatures exist and you guys are actually fae royalty, and to claim your inheritance you have to attend the Zodiac Academy. So they end up agreeing and it goes from there, and it's just absolutely wild and chaotic, but really fun. And the other one is the Bonds That Tie series, also from the Bookish box. Something about this cover I love. I actually have a few books by this artist. And then this is the naked hardback, which is also just absolutely gorgeous. And then the inside dust jacket has character art. So those are two of my favorites, but there are a lot of special editions that I just absolutely love. And the next prompt is, what is your all-time favorite romantasy? And for me, it is A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. This is the second book in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. I think I've read the A Court of Thorns and Roses series about 4 or 5 times completely through. I know I've read A Court of Mist and Fury at least 12. This is my comfort read. Anytime I'm feeling down, I pick this book up. I love these characters so much. There is a friendship group in this book I would give anything to be part of. The romance is so spectacular. The healing the main character goes through and just everything about this I absolutely love. So this is my all-time favorite. I will say Reign of Shadows and Endings did come somewhat close, but this still reigns supreme. And next up is, who is your favorite fantasy romance author? This was impossible to narrow down to one author. So starting off with Sarah J. Maas, she is one of my top favorites. Also Jennifer L. Armentrout and Rebecca Yarros. I have really been enjoying the Empyrean series. I already mentioned Ella Fields. She deserves so much more love. She typically writes darker fantasy romance. Also, we have some authors that started out writing dark and contemporary that have shifted to writing fantasy, like Callie Hart. I absolutely loved Quicksilver, so she's also a new favorite. Melissa K. Rorich, who wrote the Lady of Darkness series and the Legacy series. There are just so many new fantasy romance authors emerging, and I want to read them all. And next up is, what is the last romantasy that you've read? I recently finished The Crown of Oaths and Curses by J. Bree. Now, I am a little hesitant to say this is a romantasy. While this is setting up for a enemies to lovers romance, there was zero romance in this book. Like, absolutely zero. The two people absolutely detest each other throughout this entire book. Like, full-on loathing. They would kill each other given a chance. So with that being said, I did still very much enjoy this. If you look at this as a fantasy or a setup for a romance, we're following Rook, who is a witch who knows her fate lies with marrying the prince of the Fae, who is seen as very evil. And once they get married, the prince of the Fae can become king. So they both know their fates are entwined. So when she returns home, she finds that her lands have really been destroyed, her people are being killed, and it's just not a great place to be. And then when she finds her intended, the prince, he immediately locks her in a dungeon and just treats her abominably. And it's so, I absolutely hate Soren as a MMC. Anyway, it's their romance, and I really loved all of like the witchy magic in this and how it related to nature and the battles. So there were a lot of parts of this book that I did really enjoy, and I'm very curious to read the sequel. If you have read the second book, let me know, what did you think? And next up are what are the top 3 romantasy books on your TBR. So I figured I would grab 3 of the books I plan on reading next month. First up, we have The Goddess of. This is an adult, I think dark romantasy, where from what I remember, we're following this girl whose mother is a sea god or a sea nymph who is cursed, and in order to break the curse, she has to marry another god, which she does not want to do. So she makes a deal with a devil or a god of the underworld to live in the mortal lands, and when she gets to the mortal lands, she meets a mortal that she becomes attracted to, and then I think her past starts to creep up on her, and it sounds really good. The cover is so pretty. And the audiobook for this is dropping at the end of February, so I plan on reading it next month. I'm very excited. Then we have Heavenly Bodies. I honestly forget the plot of this story other than it involves stars that might be gods that drop. I know I've heard really good things, and I've been waiting for this to release via audio. The audio is finally dropped, and I got this gorgeous edition from Fairy Loot. It is so pretty. So that's another one. And then last up is The Wraith King by Juliet Cross. I think this is an unwanted or arranged Fae marriage that I've heard nothing but amazing things about. And the audiobook for this just dropped the week that I'm filming this video, so I do plan on reading this very early in February. And the last question is, who are some of your favorite fantasy romance content creators to follow? I feel like I follow a ton, so I will leave everyone tagged down in the description below, and I am so sorry if I left you out. I just know I follow a lot of content creators. But first off, we have Rachel from Raven-Haired Reader. I get so many recommendations from her. She just hit 30K over on YouTube. Check her out. She's absolutely amazing. Tori from Novel Life, I've gotten a couple recs from her. Really love her. She also reads contemporary romance. Isa from Fun Fantasy Books. She mostly reads fantasy romance, but she does occasionally have a good fantasy romance rec in there. My friend Hannah over at Hannah Blackwell. She reads mostly fantasy romance, monster romance, and dark romance. Also, April from Happily Ever April. She also reads fantasy romance, dark romance. Actually, I don't know if she reads dark. She reads a mix of things, but I've gotten really good underrated fantasy romance recs from her. Carrie from Book for Romance. She's not super active on YouTube, but I always get amazing recs. Amanda from Amanda's Booktopia is another really good one to follow. Clint from Reads Readers. They both read a lot of fantasy romance. Bex from Bexa Reads, the queen of collabs. She also has a ton of very underhyped recommendations, so I found a lot of really good recs from her. And I'm sorry if I forgot anyone else, but there are so many great fantasy romance content creators out there, so if you know any more, please leave them down in the description below. Alright guys, that is it for my Romantasy Readers tag. Thank you so much, Jess from Peace Love Books, for putting this tag together. It was really fun. If you are seeing this video, consider yourself tagged. And I'd like to say a special thank you to my Paladin protectors, Amanda, Jess, Leslie, Lotta, Kat, and Kylie. Thank you guys so much for supporting my channel. And I said this already, I post new videos every Wednesday and Sunday. And if you haven't yet, please like and subscribe. I will see you all next week. Bye.